There it is. Oh, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Scientific Outdoorsman podcast. And before I tell you what the heck this podcast is about, we're just talking about all kinds of stuff. We figured we might as well be recording while we're talking about. So, me and Matt just got done doing some elk hunting, which is pretty fitting for this podcast because we're going to be talking about elk. But we were able to harvest some grouse, and Cody was asking if these things are stupid. And I was going to share a story, which I think answers the question pretty effectively. So me and Matt are coming out of the woods, right? And we're like arguing about where grouse, like based on like where we've been kicking up grouse, like what's the habitat to look for grouse? And Matt's like, he's like, they're everywhere. Like, it doesn't matter. They're anywhere. And I'm like, no, they really seem to like tops of ridges where there's like a lot of sun and like vegetation and stuff. And literally, as we're arguing, I'm like, oh, there's a grouse right there, and it's just like standing on the side of the road, just like walking along. So we like stop. He like backs up. We grab the shotguns, and like we get out the car and start sneaking over to it. And I'm like peeking under stuff, like trying to see where it's at. And the stupid thing was just standing on a log, like looking at us, like 20 yards, just like, what are you guys doing? So I shoot that thing. And then two jump up and fly away, and we like watch them fly off. And we're like, they went over here. Let's go look for them. So we start sneaking through there. And they usually flush up the trees, like they go up to a branch. So we're like walking through the area, like looking at the trees, trying to spot these birds. We finally like walk all over the area, like I don't know where the hell they went. Like turn around, start walking back to the truck, and it turns out like we just walked right past them. They were just sitting on the ground looking at us. And I spot one sitting on a branch, like on a log again. I shoot that one. The other one flies and it's just sitting on a log, and he shoots it. So yes, they're dumb as rocks. They are not smart. It's honestly shocking that like they have survived this long. So
I think there's just so many of them. They have large clutches and they reproduce when they're pretty young. So there's a lot of woods out there too that people probably not really getting to them. And I probably kicked up this past weekend another 10 grouse. Shot at one but missed it. Got the arrow though. But
did you get your arrow back from that tree?
It fell out, but
did it really?
I couldn't find it.
Oh,
I'm guessing there's a ton of branches. It might have got caught up in some of them on the way down.
Maybe it might have bounced like further away from the tree.
Yeah.
But yeah, we should probably do an episode about grouse, because I actually think it's these are all interesting questions. But I think you're right. Like I think there's so much woods where people aren't going to look for them. Like they're not taking shotguns out there to hunt grouse that are like far from the roads. Like most people are hunting grouse close to the roads. So I think there's just like there's enough of a population to replenish the ones that are close to the road that it kind of works out.
They're like hogs of birds.
They're definitely like they're pretty fun to like chase if you like know where to look for them. Like we had a lot of fun trying to kill some. So anyway,
you get a decent little meal out of them.
Yeah,
dude, they're like chickens. It's literally like a chicken. And I brought like two of them home and cooked it up for Patricia, and she loved it. Like it's such a delicious bird, man. I wish we had them down here. In fact, the other day I was scouting and I kicked up a little green heron, and just like the wing beat was like at the same like pace,
Hope you didn't have a gun on you.
I immediately was like grouse, like never mind. That's just a little green heron. So, but anyway, yeah. So we're gonna be talking about elk today. I actually literally don't know what about elk because, as we mentioned in the last episode, we're doing this thing now where one of us doesn't read the paper so they can ask all the stupid questions. And that's my job today. And that's probably one of the jobs I do best around here. So what the hell are we talking about?
Well, do you have any announcements first? You seem to always have announcements.
Well, yeah. I mean, we'll do those in a second. I just wanted to give people just a teaser of what the topic.
Right. So yeah, well, Elk.
What's
Cody, you picked this week's paper.
So I picked a paper I found that's kind of in the same vein. This one's a little more complicated than my dissertation research, but it focuses on how these movement strategies, or like behavioral types of elk, might be selecting for different resources in Colorado. So it's hierarchy and structuring of resource selection, understanding elk selection across space, time, and movement strategies by Storm Cruise et al.
Cool name, by the way.
I think that's name.
I think you should find a way to like a reason to cite this in your dissertation.
Oh, I definitely can. I'm about to.
Yeah. Sweet.
That's cool.
Yeah. So announcements. I hadn't even really thought this through, but before we get into announcements, I just kind of want to touch on this, these two hunters that died out there in Colorado, because we were literally out there, the days before that, and we knew that there was bad weather coming out, right? Because that was the second weekend, right? When we decided we were not going out today, right?
Well, so
that was a Thursday, I think.
It was,
we went out on Friday.
I think so, yeah.
And we, the weather was crap, which of course would be the case when I come to visit, because apparently it never rains. But you can see the mountains from Matt's house, and we couldn't see them that day. So we were like, nope. Even the next morning after these guys were killed, we decided to stay in, and we camped that night. Remember, it was insane.
Yeah.
And yeah, these guys went missing on, I think it was on the 11th.
Yeah.
And nobody knew what had happened. The only thing they knew was there was wet clothes in the car, all their gear was in the car, and the last time they checked in was at the car, and then they just disappeared. And everybody kept saying they died of exposure, and I just kept thinking to myself it wasn't that cold, especially I feel in the temperatures that it was, if you were out there exerting energy, you're producing a lot of heat from your body. It's there's no way you're gonna die from hypothermia out there.
I'll push back on that just for 1 second, because there was that one night that dipped below freezing, and these guys might have been 2,000 feet higher in elevation than us. So if
that is true,
overnight,
I haven't looked at the elevation that they were at in that region, but it was close to where I hunted a couple years ago, and we were up at 11.5 then. So yeah, you're not wrong. It might have overnight definitely got colder.
Yeah.
But still, it wasn't that cold, So I was kind of surprised at the idea that they would have gone out and somehow died of hypothermia. But the coroner's report came back and they got freaking struck by lightning. What a crazy way to go, But thought it was worth mentioning, that I mean, I wanted to say oh, you gotta make sure you're prepared out there, but I don't even think there's a way you can prepare for something like that, just wrong place, wrong time.
Well, I think, one thing you can do is, a lot of these times it is difficult to see what weather's like when it's coming in, but if you have a storm that's coming in like that, see if you can find shelter, get under some tree, get into thick tree habitat, get under the trees,
They were under a tree.
They were?
Yeah. I think the tree got struck by lightning that they were sitting under. And them in the process. But I mean, yeah, there's nothing you can do about a situation like that. I can't even fault them. They didn't make any poor decision. I mean, maybe the poor decision was going out, when they came back to the truck soaking wet, changed and went back out, like maybe that should have been the moment that you go, you know what, maybe we'll just stay in the car for the next few hours. But
yeah, but even then, like these storms, they move in quick and they move out quick, and
yeah.
you're out there. I think there was someone that they were talking with before they passed, and the guy, another hunter, and they said they heard a bull and they were going back after it. I would have done the same thing. You're out there to go hunt, and when there's rain that comes in, you go for shelter.
You hunker down.
And like I often go to like probably one of the biggest trees to give me the most shelter, and that's maybe that's not the smartest idea because that's the one that's most likely to get hit by lightning. Maybe I should just go look for one that it's
the tallest ones. It's not always the biggest one, or like thickest one or whatever. But yeah, probably not the best idea to go sit next to the tallest tree. But we don't know the details of what they did. We were camping in that crazy storm, and there was lightning strikes like all around us, and like they were close.
And we were sleeping right next to a giant tree.
We were sleeping next to a giant tree, but at the same time, like there was giant trees like kind of all around us, and that's why I was like, I'm not really worried about it. Like I think you were freaking out a little more than I was. But like every time the lightning would strike, I would like shock awake, and then just pass right back out again. Like I wasn't that concerned about it, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what like if I had like a false sense of security there, or if they were just sitting next to like the tallest tree, and that was like a bad move. But either way, it really sucks. For their families, and so I think I should probably say my condolences go out to their families. But at least they were out doing what they loved, and it was a quick death. So anyway, should probably shift to more positive things, huh?
Yeah. Anything else?
I don't know. I don't even think I have announcements right now. Which is amazing.
Yeah, updates on that survey of the Ocala area as a national park?
Oh, that's a good one. From what I have read recently, it hasn't moved forward yet, but that doesn't mean that it won't. I made a post about it on Instagram, and it's been kind of going viral. People have been sharing it. So, as of right now, like people just need to be, contacting their representatives, their state reps, and letting them know that they oppose it. That's really the best thing we can do right now. But I also saw an article that the Representative Randy Fine has heard some of the pushback against it. So I think that's a good thing. We just got to keep making noise and make sure everybody hears it. Because it's one thing for him to hear it. It's another thing for all the other representatives to hear it, because they're the ones that can vote against it. So just keep making noise, and hopefully we'll get this thing shut down. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I got. So let's talk about elk movement patterns. Patterns.
Do you want me to start it, Matt?
Sure.
All right. So I guess maybe I'm not super familiar with the area, so help me out as we go. We're in the study took place in Colorado, 2017 to 22 or so. But I guess the main impetus for this is a lot of times we focus on restoration and population management. We kind of treat these animals as all doing the same thing. They're all behaving in similar ways for the most part. We often assume, and they're seeking the same sort of resources. In this paper, they bring in this behavioral component where they quantify the movement strategies of these elk in these different herds. They want to see if these different movement strategies being used by the elk are also kind of coinciding with them relying on different resources that they're selecting for. It allows them to live. So they're carving out their own unique niche or their own role, and they move differently as a result.
I'll just mention that. So for listeners, they're probably familiar with some of these different strategies that Cody's talking about. So probably heard of like nomads, right? The ones that are moving around, just kind of going to wherever they want to go. You have on the other end of the spectrum, you have residents. So they're just going to stay in the same spot. And then between those two ends, you have migratory, where they have these core habitats or environments that they go back and forth between. And so those are kind of the spectrum of these strategies. And a lot of times animals will take a different strategy in response to resource availability. Resources, whether it be food or shelter, water, they're things that aren't equally distributed across the landscape, and they're also not always available in the same location over time. So animals are going to be moving around both to access those resources if they need to, if it's not always available in that same location.
Yeah.
And I suppose like pressure or like predator presence could also be like a
driver. We've talked about that too.
And that's maybe a discussion point for this paper. And bring that up. But yeah, so
sorry, just getting ahead of the plan here, I guess.
So the last thing, I guess, is I'd like to mention. Thanks, Matt, for that. Is they're just focusing on resident versus migrant behavior. So I guess the main idea is elk will move kind of lower elevations in the winter and then catch that green up during the summer months, and they'll migrate to higher elevations. Is that kind of the general pattern we assume that they take? Mm-hmm. But it's known that there are some resident elk that just stay in one core area during winter and summer. So what resources might they be capitalizing on that are maybe different than the migratory elk?
I would imagine, like, when they do that, I would imagine they're staying at lower elevation then, right? Because I doubt anybody's staying at high elevation.
Right. Yeah. So so that's in the paper they call that it's a partial migration. So you have part of the population that migrates and part that stays behind. And for elk specifically, there have been other papers that look at some reasonings behind this, and it's all about risk trade-off, right? So you can have exposure to risk, but then also what's your foraging access like, and all that can then influence things like the calf survival. And so all these factors are kind of like this
trade-off
decision matrix or trigger. Yeah, that's probably a better way to think about it. That dictates what elk do, or animals in general. So like Cody said, this study took place primarily in Colorado, where they looked at 4 different elk herds: the Bears Ear Steamboat population, Avalanche Creek, Uncompahgre Plateau, and Trinchera. The Trinchera population gets a little bit into New Mexico. Then also the Bears Ear population. Occasionally will wander over to Wyoming. Wanted to point out those different locations also because the Uncompahgre Plateau, that's the spot right by me here in Southwest Colorado, where Mark and I have been spending a lot of time. So it's cool to, see these places. Yeah. Part of this paper that I'm probably most jealous of is the actual collection or tagging of the elk. So they radio collared both calves and adult females, so no bulls were tagged. And they did this when they were on the wintering ranges between 2017 and 2021. And they did that by helicopter net gunning or darting. So just drive around or ride around in a helicopter, see a herd of elk down below, probably on some crop field or something like that. And you just start net gunning, just drop these huge nets on an individual or just darting them to knock them out. And then, so there's these 4 different herds, and they collared over 100 elk for each of those herds. So a lot of elk that got collared across this time, a lot of net guns and helicopter rides, I imagine.
Can you imagine the cost of doing that? Like, because helicopter rides are freaking expensive. I knew that from experience. It's like,
from your time up in Alaska?
I wonder how many hours in a helicopter it took to like net gun this many elk.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, like I imagine, because the other thing is, I imagine if you shoot a net gun off, I don't know how big the net guns are, but elk are pretty large. Can't imagine you're getting a lot of elk in one net. And as soon as you shoot
one,
that's what I would imagine.
Calves, right? Like you get a full adult, like female elk. That's gotta be. I don't know. Can you?
Well, I think they get tangled up like in the net, and they just lay down. And then, I mean, I would imagine after they net them, they then trank them.
Yeah,
like,
I would hope so.
I'm not walking up to a cow. Those things are huge, man. When I saw one of those things running by me, I was like, "Holy shit, that's a big deer." I wouldn't want to mess with one.
But what I was gonna say is, I imagine as soon as you shoot that thing off, the herd's just gonna.
They're gone.
Gone, exactly. So you don't get many elk out of each attempt. So yeah, it's probably a lot of helicopter hours. So anyways,
$1,000.
They get all these elk, and then they looked at variation in elk resource selection behavior based on season, as well as between and within these four herds. These are all Rocky Mountain elk. And they classified movement strategies for each elk, like Cody said, as either being migratory or resident for each year that elk was tracked. And they did all that to assess herd level strategy composition. So for each elk in its first year, or for a given elk, for each year that it was tracked, they said, okay, is it resident? Is it migratory? And then they looked at the composition of the entire herd annually. And residents were classified as elk that typically stayed in the same general area, but kind of more importantly, stayed at the same elevation, whereas migrants moved seasonally between two distinct ranges. They also identified a couple other movement behaviors. So dispersers, which was, like I was talking about before, migrants go back and forth between different habitats. Dispersers, they just go. One species that I think a lot about with dispersers is mountain lions. You hear stories about mountain lions from the Dakotas. Well, a couple times this happened. Mountain lions from the Dakotas disperse all the way over to New England. That's not a migration. That's an animal that's on the move going somewhere new. So they looked at that, saw a couple instances of that with the elk, but then also if elk were just kind of doing uncharacteristic movements or ambiguous behaviors, then they said that was unclear movement as well.
That's my favorite one. That's what I'm going to include in my stuff. It's ambiguous.
It's just unclear.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Those are the hardest ones to kill too.
Yeah, just like no idea where they're gonna go.
You always hear stories about like white-tailed deer or something. They're like multiple people in like several counties have on camera, and they're just like nobody can figure out the pattern. They're just like showing up on somebody's camera like miles and miles away, and then suddenly they pop up over somewhere else. And then after somebody kills it, like everybody starts putting all the pieces together, and they're like, "What the hell? This deer was like insane.
It's a drifter.
Impossible to kill."
That's how they get old. So they figured out the movement strategy for each elk by year, and then they also looked at it seasonally, and then they compared across seasons to figure out, is this something where this individual is moving like a migrant, or is it more of a resident? And the seasons that they really focused on were just summer and winter, which makes sense. Those are the times of year that you'd expect these elk to be in different habitats. But that also means that we're not really looking at anything during fall when you'd be having any hunting season going on. So that was one thing that I was a little bummed to find out about this paper, is it doesn't really get into resource selection during hunting season, but it's still really fascinating to see the variability in behaviors and get an understanding of what still drives elk movements. So they modeled fine-scale seasonal resource selection of individuals to compare the strategy-specific resource selection. So like Cody was saying, if you're a migrant, if you're a resident, how do your resource selection behaviors differ? And the resource parameters or variables that they were looking at were vegetation quality, or like the productivity, topography, land cover, which included residential, crop cover, forest, herbaceous, and then just other. They had road density and distance to development. So development either being residential areas or roads. If you remember from our episode, I think it was the last episode that we were looking at, talked about last couple episodes, talked a lot about how elk interact with human presence, especially trail networks. And we already know that, they don't like them, especially when there's hunters in the area, but in general, they still don't really like them. And then they also looked at consistency within populations. And they did that by creating what they called an index of consistency to get an idea of resource selection behavior and the degree of differentiation in those behaviors based on migration strategy, season, and then also across herds and across those different resource parameters.
Yeah, that was good. Anything else? I don't have anything else. Should we go?
Any questions, Mark? You look like you got a puzzled face.
I mean, I was just kind of, honestly, I was sitting here like trying to wrap my head around everything that you just said. And I'm like, man, the listeners are probably like, what the hell did he just say?
It's a bit of a complicated study, for sure.
So the gist of it is they tagged these things, and then they looked at the habitat that they were found in during these different times to see if they were selecting for certain types of habitats and movement patterns between them.
Yeah. So they group by herd and then also by season for
each
year.
And the movement strategy. Yep.
So what did they find?
Well, to start, it wasn't evenly distributed between the herds. The movement strategies weren't evenly distributed, same ratio. So, like, for example, Bear's Ear, they were all entirely migrants. And that's, as I understood, part of the reason they were included within the steamboat. And then they took them out for a lot of the following resource selection function analysis. On the opposite end, the Trinchera, is that how you say it? Trinchera was predominantly resident elk. So they saw differences in the propensity of movement strategies between each of the herds.
I'll just say, I thought that was just amazing that you have this population, this Bear's Ears population, that was just entirely migrant elk, and just gives a good example of how you can have this really diverse behaviors specific to herds, where this, but then also, you look at the Avalanche Creek where it's almost like 50-50, mm-hmm. Half of them stay, half of them go. Also mentioned there were only these two individuals that had that dispersal behavior where they just kind of go off. So most elk are either going to be resident to an area or they're going to disperse or they're going to migrate between different habitats.
Yeah. And then,
so like from the perspective of like hunting elk, I feel like herds that are more resident are kind of more susceptible to like being hunted because I feel like they're the kind that are putting down patterns.
You're getting ahead.
I'm sorry.
I want to talk about that a little bit and hear what you guys have to think in the discussion. But yes, that's a very good point. Well, first result is pretty interesting for sure. It seems like it's region specific how these animals are adapting to the landscape. When they look at the resources that they're selecting for, so the crops, how close they are to development, how thick, or like if they're selecting for herbaceous habitat versus forest, and how thick the plant cover is, they find a lot of differences between summer and winter, between herds, between movement strategies. Most of the difference they find, though, is between the different herds or the different like regions and locations, followed by the seasons. That was the next strongest difference in driving those resources that they're selecting for. And then finally, it was the movement strategy behavior. So it's the least impactful in driving differences in the resource selection, their behavior. Um,
I'm going to pull up one of the figures that I think helps demonstrate this. Just the variability that's going on here. So there's a lot going on in this figure. But basically what we're looking at is all of these environmental parameters that we were talking about before: crops, development, the habitat quality. This is the vegetation quality, and just other parameters. We have the residents.
Sorry, I think that's one of the things maybe we talk about is quantity, not the quality, which I think is another shortcoming that we should talk about.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so we have the resident behavior, we have the migrant behavior, and then we have all these different herds. Cody mentioned that season is really important too. Right now, we're only looking at winter, but the dotted lines in the middle indicate that there is no effect. And if you have the bars, like so, for example, I'll start on the top here. If a bar overlaps that dotted line, it means there's no effect. If you have a population that's to the left of the dotted line, it means there's avoidance. And if you have a bar that's to the right of the dotted line, it means selection. And like Cody was saying, you see a lot of variability among the herds based on what they're doing. You see some differences between residents and migrants. And the next figure below will show some of those seasonal things, but you can't really compare seasons next to each other on this figure. This is just winter. Yeah.
I find it crazy that there are herds that are avoiding crops, especially in the winter when food sources are pretty limited. It makes me wonder what is driving that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think on the
probably
other side,
helicopters, too many helicopters
flying around the crop fields.
Yeah.
Well, one point on the crops is the residents, as you might expect, I guess, if you know elk, from what I'm gathering from reading this, are more likely to select for the crops. The migrants less so, in winter or summer.
And strong selection for distance to development. So what this means is it's not that they're selecting for development; it's they're selecting for greater distance from development. Right. So that's one thing to think about there. Is that
well, that's been a consistent thing in all the papers that we've looked at. They don't want to be close to people. So it kind of makes you wonder if maybe, those crops, like how close are they to, humanity?
Right.
If it's like the way that it is in Montrose, there's crop fields, but there's houses kind of dispersed all throughout them. I can't really imagine elk hanging out in those, And actually, I guess the Uncombagre is one of these. Which one?
So it's the green one here. So there's some selection for crops for the migrants, which makes sense. The residents, I think they're able to find habitat that provides food that's further from those crop fields.
The other thing to think about there, and I feel like they should have included the variable of elevation in this, because if the elevation of an area is lower, then they're more likely, it's going to be a milder winter. They're more likely to be able to find food, further away from, developments and further up into the mountains than they would in areas where maybe it's really steep and it goes up into high elevation very quickly,
And I think, that's probably one of the things that drives the herd-based differences is, these are all Rocky Mountain elk. They're all going to have the same, or all basic requirements. And, to me, that means that the differences in their behaviors are likely going to be influenced by what they have available to them.
Yeah.
The Uncompahgre Plateau here maxes out at 9,500 feet. Some of these other populations, they max out at like we were talking about before, probably over 12,000 feet. And so they're going to have
Got pizza.
They're going to have much larger distances. They're going to have a lot less access to some of these things. And so you're going to have population effects that are due to the differences in the environments where those populations exist.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, you remember when we looked at, I think it was like a turkey paper that we looked at where they looked at like habitat selection. But what they did is remember they picked like random locations and then characterized what was around them. Like I feel like they could have employed something like that here, where they're actually characterizing the resources that are available so that they could see whether or not they're, like them selecting for it, like what the chances were of them selecting for it randomly.
So they did that, like where they were at and what they're actually using relative to what was available. They did some of that, but they didn't get into classifying the different like habitat types as much as that paper for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Which again maybe is a shortcoming.
I feel like them not bringing up the elevation thing and like the habitat types and resources that can go along with that.
It's tough though, because like elevation is a component that's determining the behavior, the movement strategy, whether they're resident or migrant. And so you could have, I think you could look at maybe like average elevation of summer habitat, and then see what's the maximum elevation that they're at in the summer, or not maximum, but like on average, what elevation are they at in the summer? And is that, if that's a higher elevation, are they more likely to be more migrant? Whereas if it's a lower elevation, maybe they can stay more resident. Or maybe look at, the difference in elevation between the average summer and average winter populations.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, I feel like the story that you get from summertime is potentially more telling about their habitat preferences, because that's when all the habitat's available.
Well, why don't we look at summer? So this plot here
this
plot here is now showing the distribution, or not the distributions, the selection for those same parameters, same variables for residents and migrants across the different herds for summer. The thing that I think is consistent, is like we talked about before, they're always avoiding development. There's still almost all populations, but for both resident and migrant, are avoiding development. There's only one population, the Trinchera population, that didn't select for or avoid development. But other than that, they're all avoiding it, and they're all selecting for habitats that are going to have higher productivity of vegetation. So that's that NDVI index down here, and you can see that they're all, as you expect, trying to find that
where the plants
are, good vegetation.
Go back to winter real quick. I just wanted to compare what that looks like.
So my main kind of takeaways between the two, winter and summer, or like you said, generally between both they avoid development, but maybe there's a little bit more. There's a little less selection against in the winter. The productivity in summer, they're selecting those thicker habitats more, the higher NDVI scores. And then what else is there? The crop cover. The residents, like I said, were more likely to select that. And then in the winter, there's more divergence across the different herds in those anthropogenic categories, the crops and development. So in the winter,
I'll go back up to that.
In the winter time, it's a little more varied, as I saw it, in who's willing to, or like how far away they're selecting from human development, from crops or from roads. But like it makes sense to me where in the winter it's harsh conditions. You can't really avoid some of these places quite as easily. Summer, like Mark was saying, the whole landscape's available to them. Like you're maybe getting a better view on what resources or what areas they're really looking to make a living in and what they're selecting for.
All right, Mark, ask away. I see that puzzled look again.
It's not a puzzled look. I'm just like staring at it. There's a lot of information.
There's a lot of information in this paper. And I think that's, the main takeaways that I got from this are herds are going to do different things. The exceptions to that are they all avoid human development, and in the summer they're looking for good quality habitat, which that also makes sense to me too. Like they're coming off of winter, they're coming off of spring, they're going to be looking to feed. Yeah, right. That they're trying to build up their reserves and get ready for probably the next year. So it's something that those things are the consistencies. And then the other components, I think, are where you see variability based on probably what the local environments provide.
I feel like, like you said, the biggest takeaway here is that like there's no real pattern, like none that's particularly useful in from a perspective of hunting. It's basically that every single herd, they behave differently, except for the fact that they stay away from humanity. They don't like people. So basically it comes down, like, if you're listening to this and you're an elk hunter and you're like looking for, some sort of like takeaway message that you can use to improve your hunting, it's that you're going to have to figure it out for the herd that you're hunting, because they behave differently in every place. So just because your buddy that lives on the other side of the state or in another state has success doing, like finding elk this way, doesn't mean that you're going to have success in the area that you're at, because they may have a completely different movement strategy, and you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. Like, which is like such a shitty takeaway. So just like, we got nothing for you. Sorry.
Well, one thing I will say though, like if we think about hunting season, we aren't really seeing many differences between the residents and the migrants and their behaviors. So, it's something where you can kind of expect the elk within the population, within that herd, to all do fairly similar things during the hunting season.
Right.
So I think that's maybe reassuring. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe you'd want more diversity because you got more chances of encountering elk doing different things. But
unless you can figure out, where they're going to be, then you have more chance.
Yeah.
Because they're all going to be doing the same sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like I feel like the areas that we were in, I mean, I don't know, but I kind of got the impression from the new and old sign that we were seeing that like there's potentially resident elk in there.
They're at least going back there.
They're going back
year after year. Yeah.
But I guess that would kind of make them migrate.
So it'd be, well, we don't know what they're doing in the winter. They're most likely dropping down. Well, I know they're dropping down. They're not staying up there during the winter. Most of them are dropping
down. You're finding antlers further down. So those are more migrated.
And that's the thing, like, I find antlers further down, but then also further down, there's people that are hunting them in the fall. So that to me is the population that's the resident, whereas the migrant ones are the ones that are going back and forth between the top of the plateau.
So in the area where you're finding antlers, people are hunting down there, like right now?
Yep.
I didn't realize that. I thought we were just like where everybody else was hunting.
No, so there's like a 2,000 foot gradient in I'd say the area that people are hunting in that area. And that lower spot is where you can find some sheds.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go visit that in May.
Yeah.
May is when that opens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we go to figure 5? One last one.
Oh, there's
talk about it real quick. Just some of the points. So this is that consistency or differentiation score that they came up with. A higher value means the whatever group they're comparing is doing totally different things or selecting for totally different resources. The lower the number, the more consistent, less different. One of the main you see in the summer strategy in panel A, it goes the elk are doing all sorts of different things. You can go way up. Whereas winter, they're all kind of converging and selecting similar resources. So I guess during hunting season, you're kind of catching them in between those two. They're like,
well, yeah, I mean, this makes sense to me because, in the summer is when you're going to have the differences between the residents and the migrators. The residents stay down, the migrators go up, and then in winter, everyone's condensing down.
Landscape available to them. Yep. Mm-hmm. And you see that where herd is the greatest difference. So again, it's like you got to know your population. Is really shown. And then strategy was the least influential. So
So with that said, I feel like I started saying this earlier, but the residents, I think, are potentially more susceptible to, hunters really figuring them out. So Matt, maybe you should be, focusing on those lower elevations and really trying to figure out where those elk are hanging out. But I also kind of wonder, like, while they may stay at those lower elevations, I have a feeling that there is changes in the areas that they like to be.
Oh, yeah. I imagine there are. And I'd also say, you have to think about what's the proportion of the population that's resident versus that's migratory. If you think about the bears of your population, if you're planning to hunt a resident population, you're not going to see any elk because they're all migratory. I think it was the Trinchera that was the opposite end of that spectrum, where that's a population that maybe it does make sense to, look to see where they are in the winter, and you can expect to see them in that same general habitat in the summer and fall, and maybe you'll find some sheds while you're out elk hunting too. Who knows?
The Uncompahgre was
like a fourth of them
was like 50-50, right?
Uncompahgre was, I think, a little bit more resident, or I'm sorry, a little bit more migratory. It was about 75-25.
Yeah, that was one thing that stood out to me, like where I hunted last time. Granted, it was it was higher elevation, but like on the way up, we were finding sheds. They're all shitty and old and like broken and stuff like that. But where we were at, I guess we were able to just start up high, so it was like we were never crossing any area where you might find sheds, which I was a little sad about. And then again, we heard a lot of bugling bulls. It was freaking awesome. So and for anybody who's interested in those adventures, I'm working on editing those videos up, and there's some pretty cool footage. So hopefully you guys will be able to enjoy it soon. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to
it. Next year you're coming, just so you know. Next year we're gonna have we're gonna have a whole gang of people. In fact, my buddy Mike was texting me today. He's heading out that way. But from what I understood, he's just going to listen to bugles. He's not going to hunt them. But I was like, we're gonna go again next year. You want to go? And so he might be down. We're forming a whole crew.
Elk drives everything in Colorado during archery season, right?
Yeah, elk drive. Yeah. Good luck.
I guess I'll talk about this past weekend, where I was up on the plateau and
all by your lonesome.
It's all by my lonesome. And
without me to snuggle.
Just about, it got a little chilly without having Mark holding my back. But
you mean filling the tent with warm air?
Yeah, that too. Those dehydrated meals, yeah, they do a wonder on you. But anyways, so was out hiking around and listening for bugles and whatnot or any sign of elk, and ended up jumping a bull, just in some thicker habitat, and just see him kind of go running off. And it's like, all right, well, I didn't hear like a ton of crashing. I don't think he went too far. So I kind of slowly move around, trying to find where he might have gone and looking for tracks and whatnot, and didn't see him. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to sit, let things kind of calm down a little bit, see if I can hear anything. And then I heard some motion going on up the ridge right behind me. So I was like, all right, maybe he went up there. So start going up that way, thinking, it's a lone bull. He's going to be looking for cows. He's going to want to be on the top of the ridge to call. But it's middle of the day. It was like 1 o'clock. I was thinking, well, all the things I'm seeing are saying that these elk, they kind of want to be down by the bottom of these drainages during the middle of the day. It's like, well, maybe I'll drop down to the other drainage, thinking that maybe he went up and over. And I get halfway down that drainage. I'm like, you know what? I think he's still in that area as before. So I'm going to go back over there. I'm going to go down to the water over there, and maybe I'll see him on that side. And as I'm walking down, I bump him again. And this time I could tell he didn't go far. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm going to run around in front. I'm going to try and get in front of him. And pretty much like I'm driving him, but then also wanting to be the guy that, gets in front to shoot him. And so I bump him once, or I guess this is now the second time, and I hear him go a little bit. So I go forward, and, he's down below, I'm up on top, and probably about like 50 feet elevation difference, but there's a bunch of brush in between us. But every once in a while, there's little openings that can sneak down. So I start sneaking down this one. I'm waiting for him to pop out. And then I hear some movement, and I realize I didn't get far enough forward. He's in front of me. He must have saw me or something. He moves again. So I'm like, all right, this time I'm going to move even further. So I come up again. I go forward. I get out in front. I got this really nice shooting lane. I can see perfectly down. And I'm just like, I'm expecting him to come out. I definitely went far enough. And it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Worst time of the day for the wind. It just starts spinning. And I can't see him, but I hear him just take off. And I searched the rest of the afternoon for this guy, but he was close. He was probably about like 40 yards. If he kept going, I would have had a nice broadside shot, 30 yards. But
you weren't calling at him?
So the first time I busted him, or first time I jumped him, I think what happened was I called right before that, and I didn't hear any response. Like, I was close to him when I called. He definitely heard it. And I think he got up, and he was kind of looking to see what was coming. He saw me, and he just kind of ran a little bit, because I was downwind when he ran off. And then, I didn't really get many responses, actually no responses to the cow call like we did. I think there's this unit that we're hunting. There's a lot of hunting pressure. And I think the elk are starting to learn that there's, these calls aren't always cows. They might want to check it out before they just start bugling back and running at them. The funny thing is, the unit that we were hunting is right next to another unit, and that unit has a lot less hunting pressure, and spent a little bit time close to that unit. And you could hear elk just going off, just bugling like crazy. They were responding really well, but there's not as many hunters in there. So I think, this is, again, comes back to what we're talking about, not just, but with this paper, thinking about different movement strategies, but also just behaviors in general are often dictated by, trying to avoid risk. And if there's low risk, you're probably more likely to hear some of these elk bugling, get on them, have them come into you. If there's a lot more pressure, you might be able to have them come in calling at them, but they might get held up a little bit further away, or, they might come in quiet rather than bugle back. So
I think the reality, like from, like we've heard this from people as well, but like, I think a lot of times they're going to come in quietly. Like, they'll hear you and they'll come, but they'll come quietly. And we had that with the bull that we had at 35 yards. Like, we were slipping through some thick stuff. We called. We didn't hear anything. We kept moving, and then all of a sudden, it was like, there's a bull right there, And I think he was bedded down. I think he started kind of sneaking over to us to see what was making that noise.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It's like it's so hard though, because you're trying to cover ground, so you can't just like sit down every time you call.
Right. Yeah.
But you almost need to. or at least like, you know, move very slowly and in thick cover when you're calling, so that.
But even then, they're if you call and then you move after that, they're looking right where you're calling from.
Oh yeah.
They know where to look. And if they either they don't see an elk, like they don't see a cow coming, or they see something that's not a cow, they're going to react to that and they're going to get out of there.
I think you just have to be like in really thick stuff.
Yeah.
Not really thick, but you can't be calling in stuff where they can see you from a long ways away.
Right. Yeah.
If they can see you from 50 yards away, they're just gonna stand there and look and be like, nope, and turn around.
Yeah, but that's the tough thing too, right? Like you don't hear these things; they can come in super quiet for being these massive animals. Which
when we first got out there, I was like, I think we gotta be quiet. We gotta sit and do that. And he's like, dude, if a bull's coming, you'll know. I'm like, oh no, man. And then like the second morning we get out there and like we're like set up in a spot looking around and stuff, and suddenly I look over and I'm like, there's an elk right there, like 20 yards away from us.
Did not hear it coming in at all.
Yeah,
but, I think
totally quiet.
That could also have something to do with hunting pressure or something like that, because it was early in the season, so I don't know how much pressure that bull would have experienced. But my previous experience with bulls or with elk in general, it was a lot in this area, at least, was during turkey season, and they're crashing through all over the place. You could hear these things coming down the ridge, and
I'm sure they're hearing all the 4-wheelers and side-by-sides and trucks and campers and everything.
Yeah.
They know like that they need to start being quiet.
And there's probably a lot more people in the woods because there's a lot more people scouting beforehand. They get out there probably 2 weeks before the season starts. There's a lot more human presence up there, and these elk.
And I think just the scent. I think just the scent of everybody having been out there. Like I think they key into that pretty quickly. Like we really saw like on your cameras, it was like opening the first 3 days of season. They were like on a pattern. They were like hanging out in these spots. Like if we had checked those cameras the day season opened, like I'm pretty sure you would have killed, a really nice bull sitting in that spot where we were at. But
like you talk about when with the cameras that you set up in Florida, you try not to touch the ground once, and so the first time you're on the ground in that area is when you're hunting it.
Yeah,
I think that's the key. Now, like next year, I know what to do.
Put those cameras out there like a month in advance, and just leave them alone.
Yeah.
And then but that's one of the disadvantages you have in Colorado, which I think is also a good thing though, is like you don't have the cell cameras. Like I think cell cameras are good and bad, the fact that people can't use them, also like as long as people are following the rules, it like levels the playing field, Like I really like having my cell cameras in certain places because I get some intel, and from that intel I go, okay, that's where I'm going to sit on the opening hunt, and then after that, like if there's any cameras I need to go check in person, I'm like, I'm not going to touch that camera until I'm actually going to hunt it. So what you would have to do is basically pick a spot, based on sign and maybe information from this year.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
That's the spot that I'm going to sit. You're going to sit it regardless and check the camera when you're in there.
Yeah. End of the day, after the sun sets. So when that was another thing. There were 2 times that I went up a tree to check a camera, and while I was up in the tree, either we jumped an elk or elk ran right by us. And I'm up in the tree. Yeah, I'm up in the tree. Mark's on the ground. Bo's on the ground. My release is nowhere to be found.
I'm like, literally, I'm looking at my camera because he's up in a tree, and then I hear like a crunch, and I look up, and here comes a cow elk walking by at 20 yards. And then like, I jump up, and I'm like, elk. And he's like, where? He's like hugging a tree.
I can't see anything. Yeah. It's a thick pine tree.
And then like, here comes another one and another one and another one. It was like 7 cows came walking by at 20 yards. Oh, good times.
Middle of the day.
It was cool though. But
that sounds like an awesome trip.
Yeah. Next year I'm bringing my bow so that while he's in trees I can shoot elk.
So before we get too far off track from this paper, early on, Mark, you mentioned about how the differences in resident versus migrators might make some populations more susceptible to hunting and hunting pressure. And Cody, he mentioned that you wanted to get to it in the discussion, so I just wanted to touch on that.
I feel like we did. Where
we addressed it enough.
Yeah, the residents are just more risk accepting, whereas the migrants might be more risk adverse. You're a resident, you might be more likely to live close to people, and you're selected for crops more likely. I don't know what that means for natural predators or for hunting pressure. Like, I'm not familiar with these areas.
I think that also makes the assumption, though, that the migrants are moving because of hunting pressure.
No,
which I would actually say. So,
sorry, man. What?
I think. Well, so where these elk are, at least what I'm imagining, where they're staying resident, based on where I've seen the sheds and where I know that they can still be in the fall. There's good resources for them down there. A lot more consistent water. But the thing is, there's, I don't think the it's still good vegetation, but I don't think there's quite as much of it, right? I think you get a bit more vegetation higher up, just abundance, kind of like we were talking about before, something that they didn't really look at.
I think another thing to keep in mind is the quality, not just the abundance, but the quality. Think about this: when you're up higher, where you have more extreme winter conditions, a lot of the biomass that dies down in the winter gets sort of, like put into the soil there, and it's kind of stored for longer periods of time, right? During the winter time, like it's unaccessible. And then a lot of those nutrients from that decaying material are then bioavailable for new growth. And so the nutrient content in that new growth might be, significantly better than it would be at lower elevations, where like the vegetation is sort of constantly pulling nutrients out of the soil.
Yeah.
And I think another thing, that's going to differ is the vegetation that's at 7,000 feet isn't always going to be the same across different areas, because, in some spots that might be like this pinyon juniper, pretty poor quality stuff. But in another area, you might have a creek that comes through and you have this whole wetland habitat that has all sorts of good vegetation. And so I think that's another thing that is an important component here. And one thing this has me thinking about is, like the aspect, how steep is the habitat that this area is in. If you have more gradual habitat, you might have some more of those plains, some more good quality vegetation. You might have some more resources available for those resident populations. Whereas in other spots, if you don't have that flat habitat, or if you have, maybe it's drier habitat, you have more of that pinyon juniper pine, probably going to have more migrant populations that get out of that stuff, that lower elevation. It's sufficient for forage, but that's nothing compared to, like elderberries or whatever else they might be feeding on, the aspens that are at higher elevation that they can feed on the buds, and just much higher quality, like you're saying.
I think that's and also like the annual, the annual cycle, the annual disturbance of the freeze being more intense at higher elevations causes that new growth. And when you get that new growth, you're getting diversity as well, right? It's like the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. If you get those regular disturbances, you're going to get a higher diversity of vegetation growing at higher elevations, and that diversity, offers them the opportunity to get different nutrients and vitamins and whatever they need. So maybe that's part of the reason that they might want to move up with the green to take advantage.
I think what you're describing. Have you heard of the green wave hypothesis? Where they surf the green up of the plants at elevation, and that so those freshly green plants are more nutritious, and that's what drives the timing of the migration.
Right, but like my point is, like if you stay down at lower elevation, there's also green plants down there. So like,
but it's just like
the reason they follow them up is because the quality of that like fresh new growth and the diversity in that fresh new growth is valuable to them, so it's worth following it up. So the ones that are staying down at lower elevations are like accepting lower quality food.
Yep.
They're like, well, I'm familiar with this and I feel safe here, so I'm going to eat this shitty sagebrush, even though like there's delicious things up.
But they're not expending
and
energy migrating.
Exactly.
And then so that's one of the things. Like they don't get into quantifying predation risk or like condition of each of these calves or cows. I wish they had done that. And then what we're kind of alluding is they only included NDVI. That metric is, I guess, for quantity, not for quality. There's a different metric they could have used, and maybe that'll be another paper to map the quality of these different areas and see if they're selecting for higher quality resources by movement strategy. That'd be pretty interesting. And like you're saying, I totally would expect these migrants to be more likely to do so.
Yeah. All in all, I'm going to give this paper a 7 out of 10.
It's cool. I really like it. But yes, I didn't read it before ingesting it. And I didn't realize that it wasn't, occurring during hunting season. So I apologize.
Well, not just that, but I'm just saying, like, I'm talking like in terms of the detail that they went into. Like, I think there was just variables that they possibly should have thought about. But it's possible this was like a grad student, like didn't think about these details going into it. It's always easier to like think about the things that you should have done afterwards.
And also say, I would give it a little bit higher than that, because I think what they found, well, at least the questions that they were asking, looking at the effect of these different movement strategies, it just didn't have a strong effect. So the patterns that the results that they found that did have those strong effects are things that we've already seen. We know that the elk are going to respond to the differences in the human disturbances. The fact that they were able to see across these populations, the different herds, and see differences for other parameters, I think that to me it's pretty cool finding, knowing that there are those differences. What was driving those differences in the populations? I'd give it a little bit more than that, because the things that we're asking, what's driving these variabilities across these herds, these other functions, these other parameters, that's not really what this paper was looking at. They were specifically looking at the effects of the movement strategy, but then also the season and the herd, and based on those questions, they were able to answer those questions with what they looked at. I think there's good follow up here.
Sure, but like the habitat quality, like why are they picking? It's like they looked at the movement, but they couldn't really tell you why. Like, why are they choosing this? What's the habitat quality, the food quality that they're like staying in or moving to? Those are questions that like, I think if you have those answers, that's where you can really kind of start to extrapolate this more to like other areas, because you can go, oh, okay, this particular area like didn't have that food quality or whatever. I'm just making some shit up. Like didn't have that food quality, but this one did. So when the food quality is available, they might do this. Whereas like if it isn't, then they might do this. Like I feel like that's when you start to get that puzzle put together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm giving it a 7/8 out of 10, because I just want those answers. I'm not saying that they like did something wrong, like they just couldn't give us those answers, but those are the answers I want.
Yeah, I feel like,
and those are the answers that I think
I feel like that's
managers want. I was going to say those are the answers that managers want as well. It's why are they doing these things? It's valuable to see that there's these differences, but why?
My guess is that's they're gonna get a little more complicated as time goes on. Like this is the first paper, and then we're setting a foundation for it, and they're going to build and include more of those sophisticated predictor variables, like we've been talking about.
we'll have to keep an eye out for Storm Cruise Round 2. Storm Cruise being the main
I'm pretty certain
the next
one of these authors was a reviewer on a paper I'm trying to get published right now. He was like, "Hey, we checked out. It was a different paper, but."
Well, in that case, it was a 10 out of 10.
No, they do cool work. They do cool work.
I will also just say that, this paper was just accepted in February of this year. So it is possible that there's going to be some follow-up stuff that comes out.
It's like a brand new paper. That's cool. Cool. Well, I think we need to wrap it up.
Yeah,
we're a little over time already. So, thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully you guys learned something. I know I did. It's kind of fun being the one that doesn't do the reading.
I'm excited for it next time.
It's like a learning session. Yeah, we got to figure out what we're going to talk about in the next episode. We'll discuss that and figure it out.
Maybe grouse.
Maybe grouse. Maybe
some dirt.
I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities. But anyway, make sure y'all are like subscribed or following or clicking whatever buttons you got to click to make sure that you know when we put up another episode. And go check out the Swamp YouTube channel. There's always some good content in there. And we'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you, and good luck if you're going in the woods coming up here. We are. I'm so pumped. Yeah. See ya.